So the last section of adolescence is psychosocial development, and it's a huge area of clinical practice. Of course, it's the area that Erik Erikson, um, this starting point where from this point on he departed from Freud. But this is the first inklings of the identity crisis, which Erikson talked about, a consistent definition of oneself as a unique individual in terms of roles, attitudes, beliefs, and aspirations. Erikson believed that the term, the fifth stage, is about figuring out who you are. But it's confusing, and there are so many roles that a person can adopt. So it leads to identity versus role confusion. Identity achievement is Erikson's term for the attainment of identity, or the point at which a person understands who or she is a unique individual in accord with past experiences and future plans. Role confusion, or role identity diffusion, is a situation in which an adolescent does not seem to know or care what his or her identity is. He coined the term foreclosure, which is the premature identity formation which occurs when an adolescent adopts parents' or society's roles and values wholesale without questioning or analysis or discussion. And a moratorium is an adolescent's choice of a socially acceptable way to postpone making identity achievement decisions. Going to college is a common example of a moratorium. Marsh described and measured 4 specific ways young people cope with adolescence. They do it through role confusion, which we just talked about, foreclosure and moratorium, which we just talked about, and identity achievement. That's the steps or the levels that a teenager can attain. Role confusion, there's our high school students, these ones are in ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps training camp. For many youths who can't afford college, the military offers temporary identity, complete with haircuts, uniforms, and comrades. So that's often a choice for kids. 4 areas of identity formation include religious identity. Most teens accept broad outlines of parental or cultural religious identity. Specific religious beliefs may be questioned. We all think about times where we scratch our heads and wonder what we believe in. Includes political identity. Most adolescents follow parental political traditions, although not always. A political identity may emerge with weakening parental party identity. Fanatical political religious beliefs participation is pretty rare. And most teenagers identify with their ethnicity. Or it can happen vocational identity. This takes a little longer to establish. Early vocational identity is no longer relevant. Part-time work in high school is often related to negative outcomes. So the person's trying to decide what they want to do for the rest of their life in terms of working. This just gives you a breakdown of the number of hours that kids work. And there's Z-scores on grades. You can see that if you work too much, your grades go down. If you don't work, if you work less, your grades go up. So just something to think about. Another area is their sexual identity. Erikson's gender intensification no longer fits adolescent development, now called gender identity, that began with the person's biological sex and leads to a gender role. Adolescents experience a strong sexual drive as hormone levels increase and they're bombarded with media. Some adolescents foreclose by exaggerating male or female roles, others seek a moratorium by avoiding all sexual contact. There are changing attitudes about gay marriage. You can see on the top is millennials, on the bottom is the silent generation. That would be generation before me. And what you notice is that over time, um, the attitudes have gone up, more accepting. Relationships with adults are interesting. Sometimes and often there are conflicts with parents. Parent-adolescent conflict typically peaks in early adolescence and is more a sign of attachment than distance. Lots of bickering can happen. Involves petty, peevish arguing, usually repeated and ongoing. And of course, there may be episodes of uninvolved parenting. Although teenagers may act as if they no longer need their parents, neglect can be very destructive. There are cultural differences. In many cultures, the value of harmony exists above all else. So some Asian cultures are that way. Adolescent contradiction is not apparent. It doesn't mean there's not rebellion. They're just quiet about it. The closeness of the family is also another issue. It's based on four things: communication. Do parents and teens talk openly with one another? Do they support each other? Do they rely on one another? Are they connected? How emotionally close are they? And do parents encourage or limit autonomy, or are they controlling? So those are the four factors that contribute to closeness. Is there emotional dependency? Adolescents are more dependent on their parents if they are female and or from a minority ethnic group. This can be either repressive or healthy, depending on the culture and specific circumstances. Overall, parental reactions are crucial. Too much criticism or control might stop a dialogue, not improve communication and behavior. Parental monitoring is important too. Parents undergo awareness of what their children are doing, where, and with whom. On a positive note, they can be part of a warm, supportive relationship. And a negative note, it can be when overly restrictive or controlling. And sometimes parents make their child feel guilty and impose gratefulness by threatening to withdraw love or support. And in fact, that can become psychologically damaging. There's some connection with parenting genes and risk. African American parents and their 11-year-olds participated in a parenting intervention program. 3 years later, researchers found little evidence of program success. However, when DNA was collected and analyzed when participants turned 16, the major impact of the training was related to the presence of a long allele. So the genetic genes actually change by experience, and we call it epigenetics. Peer relationships are super important. Peer pressure involves encouragement to conform to one's friends or contemporaries in behavior, dress, and attitudes. It also depends on selection process. Teenagers select friends whose values and interests they share, abandoning friends who follow other pathways. In terms of facilitation, peers facilitate both destructive and constructive behaviors and so on other. This makes it easier to do both the wrong thing and do the right thing. And deviance training is the fourth facet of peer relationships. Destructive peer support in which one person shows another how to rebel against authority or social norms. All the more reason that a teenager should pick their friends carefully. Social networking has a lot to do with peer pressure in the 21st century. Technology usually brings friends together in adolescence. Most social networking is between friends, but the internet may be a lifeline for some. Online resources may be helpful for struggling teens because they are typically anonymous, yet some teens use technology to meet crucial health needs, like talking to people about health problems or concerns that they have. Romance, of course, is a big issue in adolescence. Sequence of male-female relationships during adolescence and childhood. It's based on the groups of friends, exclusively one sex or the other. A loose association between girls and boys with public interactions within crowds. Small mixed sex groups of advanced members of the crowd, and then finally the formation of couples. So there's a sequence that they go through. Think about your own adolescence. Where did you end up at this fourth stage of forming private couples? Of course, first love is important. First romance appear in high school and rarely last more than a year. Girls claim a steady partner more often than boys do. And of course, breakups and unreciprocated crushes are very common. Adolescents are crushed by rejection and sometimes contemplate revenge or even self-destruction, suicide. Same-sex romances are a newer phenomenon nowadays. Currently in North America and Western Europe, not just two, but many gender roles and sexual orientations are evident. Variance, this through research, reflects culture, cohort, and survey construction. So these do exist and will be more relevant as time goes on. Your sexual orientation refers to whether a person is sexually or romantically attracted to others of the same sex, the opposite sex, or both sexes. In other words, it's a person's erotic desires. Currently in North America and Western Europe, not just two discrete orientations are available, like hetero and homosexual, but bisexual, asexual, mostly homosexual, adamantly heterosexual, and transgender are possible. Actually, my last check of the internet showed about 58 different gender orientations. Gender dysphoria is a condition at DSM-5. It's a result of increased numbers of teenagers who feel that they can't really identify with either their biological sex. Some children suffer and feel that they don't match that. And of course, these kids feel like something's wrong with them, or something is wrong. Sex education, of course, is something in the 20th century and now the 21st century. It's a correlation between exposure to media exposure and sexual initiation from the parents. Many parents wait too long to avoid specifics and are uninformed about teenagers' relationships. Warm, open communication is effective. I think I put a couple of sex ed videos up on Blackboard. From peers, teenagers' sexual behavior is strongly influenced by peers, especially when parents are silent, forbidding, or vague. Specifics of peer education depend on the group. All members of the clique may be virgins, or all may be sexually active, and only about a half of U.S. teenage couples discuss issues of pregnancy, STIs, and many are unable to come to shared conclusions based on accurate information. So if you don't talk to kids about sexuality, then they're left to use their peer group. From educators, U.S. parents want up-to-date sex education for their teenagers, at least most do. Timing and content varies by state and community. Sex education varies by nation. Abstinence-only programs were not successful. I had sex ed in 8th grade years ago. Mental health issues pop up too. They include depression and anxiety. Self-esteem of boys and girls dips in puberty, and signs of depression are common. The level of family and peer support is really important, and cultural contexts are influential. Clinical depression is feelings of hopelessness, lethargy, worthlessness that last 2 weeks or more, for varied causes, factors, biological, psychological, genes, and rumination with peers. I also put a video on the course information about mental health issues with teenagers. Suicide does happen in adolescence, including cluster suicides where several in a group may commit suicide, or pair suicide, and a potentially lethal action against the self that does not result in death or suicide attempt. Pair suicide is common, completed suicide is not. And of course, there's suicidal ideation, teenagers talking about or thinking about suicide, usually with some serious emotional, intellectual, or even cognitive overtones. Maybe not thinking clearly. This just gives you the idea of the number of sad thoughts children have over time. You notice from as they get older, the serious numbers of thoughts go down, or the serious thoughts outpace the pure suicide attempts and ones that require medical intervention. So you always take suicidal thoughts and feelings seriously. In 2001, 11, these risk behavior survey was given. More than 1/3 of U.S. high school girls felt hopeless if they stopped doing some of their usual activities for 2 weeks or more in the previous year, while over 19%, about 1/5, seriously thought about suicide. Corresponding rates for boys was 22% and 12%, 12.5%. There are gender differences in suicide. Suicide rates among teenagers in the U.S. is 4 times higher than the rate of female teenagers. The reason for this difference is that male culture that shames those who attempt suicide and fail. Methods: boys tend to shoot themselves, females tend to swallow pills or hang themselves. May indicate having second thoughts. Girls tend to ruminate, but boys tend to withdraw. Think about if you've had episodes of sadness. Did you pull away or did you just obsess about it? And of course, hope and anger are sort of on opposite ends of the continuum. There's the issue of delinquency and disobedience in adolescence. Behaviors externalizing and internalizing behavior are more commonly associated with adolescence than any other age. Internalizing means swallowing it or shoving it away, while externalizing means acting out, which leads to breaking the law. Prevalence and incidence of criminal activity is more common in adolescence. About 1/4 of young lawbreakers get caught, and most adolescents, but the truth of the matter is that most teenagers obey the laws. Increased anger during puberty is normally, but not most normal, but most adolescents express their anger in acceptable ways, like life course persistent offenders. The criminal activity typically begins in early adolescence and continues throughout life. They become career criminals, whereas some are more limited to just adolescence. It usually stops by the time they become adults. And remember, the frontal lobes come online. And then there are pathways to adolescent crime, including stubbornness leading to defiance, shoplifting leading to arson and burglary, bullying leading to other physical traumas like assault, rape, and murder. Luckily, that's not common. There are drug and alcohol abuse and use patterns. Drugs tend to become more widespread between 10 and 20 to 25 and then decrease. Drug use before 18 is the best predictor of later drug use. So if you start in adolescence, early adolescence is likely to happen into adulthood. Depends on where you're at too. Nations having marked differences in rates of adolescent drug use, even nations with common boundaries. These variations are partly due to differing laws around the world. Adolescent culture may have a greater effect on drug-taking behavior than the laws do. Most adolescents in the U.S. have experimented with drug use, say that they could find illegal drugs if they tried. Most U.S. adolescents do not regularly use drugs. About 20% never use drugs at all. And these rates are pretty stable from state to state, but they do vary. They don't tend to change, but they vary from one place to the other. This just gives a what teenagers use over time. Obviously, the highest one on there is alcohol, and then followed by marijuana. Some are, especially prescription drugs, are very, very uncommon. It varies by gender too. Adolescent boys generally use more drugs and use them more often. Gender differences are reinforced by social constructions about proper male and female behavior. And of course, one drug is tobacco. Slows down growth, improves digestion, nutrition, and appetite. It does reduce appetite, causes protein and vitamin deficiencies, and can lead to problems with heart, lung, brains, and reproductive system. One thing I never did was smoke. Alcohol, of course, is the most commonly used drug in North America. Heavy drinking may permanently impair memory and self-control by damaging the hippocampus in the midbrain and the prefrontal cortex, which of course inhibits the limbic system. Alcohol allows momentary denial of problems, so you don't worry about them. When problems get worse because they get ignored, more alcohol is needed, and of course denial can be a serious consequence of drinking. Marijuana, adolescents who regularly smoke pot are more likely to drop out of school, become teenage parents, and are unemployed. It affects memory, language proficiency and motivation. And now that it's legal in Illinois, it'll be interesting to see if its use uh, um, affects any social issues. Something to keep an eye on. Scare tactics, of course, may actually increase drug use. Advertisements make drugs seem more exciting, and teenagers recognize the exaggeration. The ads give some teenagers the idea about ways to show defiance. Advertising against teen smoking is a good example. It actually increased the use of tobacco. So what does work? Generational forgetting seems to happen. The idea that each new generation forgets what the previous generation learned is used here. The term refers to knowledge about the harmful use of drugs. Massive ad campaigns have worked in Florida and California where teen smoking was cut almost 50%, so that seems to help. And of course, the changing social context, higher prices, targeting warnings, better law enforcement has cut down smoking. And of course, with drug use is progressive versus use is social. Few adolescent drug users are addicts, but occasional use can lead to addiction. The younger the person is at the beginning of drug use, the more likely addiction is likely to occur. And occasional drug use excites the limbic system and interferes with prefrontal cortex, stimulating dopamine production. Drug users are more emotional and less reflective.